What's up YouTube, Demi here with another Demi Splains. In this episode we will be explaining the differences between all forms of mitigation, binary mitigation, and percent mitigation, as well as the difference between effective life when it comes to life versus energy shield versus low life versus hybrid, etc. So we'll start with what is, I guess, damage mitigation, right? So what does damage mitigation actually mean? If you go to the defense tab here, and you look at your estimated damage reductions of like physical damage and resistances, like if you looked at this and didn't know anything else about the game, you would assume that physical damage reduction means that I take 14% less damage from any physical damage source applied to me, correct? That is completely wrong. Because this says estimated. That says estimated for a reason. It also says estimated chance to evade for a reason. Those are just estimates, they're not actually the formulas. And then for resistances themselves, like Chaos, Lightning, Fire, Cold, you cap at 75% unless you have some source of additional max res, such as on this character I have 76 fire res because of this one. But so for the most of this video we'll be assuming that you have 75, 75, 75 res, and your armor will come from your gear, etc. Your percent mitigation, whatever. So start with this example. So for most of these examples, I'm going to explain them with a 20,000 damage physical hit coming in, and then we'll do elemental damage after that, okay? So what we need to learn first. Let's start with evasion, I guess. So evasion is actually, it's a chance to evade, which means you either take damage or you don't take damage. So if you evade it, you're good. And the formula is your chance, or their accuracy divided by their accuracy again, plus your evasion times some other shit. So it more or less means like their accuracy checks twice, and your evasion checks once. So the higher like accuracy they have, the easier it is for them to hit you, and the more chance to evade, the harder it is to hit, etc. So you can't go lower than 5%, you can't go higher than 95%, except for if you have cannot evade. In that case you go to 0. Or if they have the vegan mod, hits can't be evaded on a weapon, etc., they have a 100% accuracy. So they just ignore your chance to evade entirely, because this would be 100 divided by 100. Okay, so that's evasion. Evade specifically. Chance to dodge is the same concept. You either dodge the hit or you don't dodge the hit. You can convert dodge chance or get spell dodge and dodge at the same time from things such as where is it? Not Jade Flask. It's the one that gives you phasing. It has 10% spell dodge on it. But the main sources of like actual dodge and spell dodge are from phase acrobatics. Okay, apparently I can't just go down to that. Phase Acros gives you, it's a keystone on the tree that gives you 30% chance to dodge. Dodge and evasion are different. Evade is a different thing. They're two separate checks. So like they'll check through your chance to evade. It's the first layer of defense, right? So it checks if they get through your evasion chance and they actually try to hit you again, they then have to check against your dodge chance, I believe. Make sure I'm saying this in the right order. Oh, also, important thing to note here. You notice how this says it's not an entropy-based evasion thing like entropy-based like evasion. Entropy-based is what that means is like, if you were really lucky in this game and you say you had 90% chance to dodge, or evade, you could always, like, if you got always lucky and you kept rolling that chance to hit evade and you never actually took that 10% chance to take the hit, you wouldn't get hit, ever. But because this game has an entropy system, eventually, in a system of entropy, you are going to get hit. Which is one of the issues that I have with this, is because like they're trying to prevent the RNG where you can get hit 3 times in a row or you could get hit never, so they eventually remove the randomizations entirely so that you can't have god tier entropy, or sorry, you can't have god tier chance to evade. So eventually you will take a hit through your evasion. Even if you have massive amounts of evasion, eventually a single hit will get through. And when that happens, well, that's the issue with evasion. You have nothing protecting you after that. You just have your chance to evade. And dodge, in this case. Dodge, spell dodge, whatever, it's the same thing. Dodge and spell dodge are capped at 75, evasion's capped at 95. So we'll move on to armor. What is armor? Well, it's another form of passive defenses, and it reduces the incoming physical damage from hits specifically. It doesn't reduce the incoming damage from like physical degens, such as bleed, or saw blades in Uberlab, or the spinning spike things. Those are physical degeneration effects, and they're not mitigated by your flat armor rating. I like how this group's energy shield is a defense type that appears on equipment. Anyways, that's sorry. Okay, so to prevent these numbers, so like you need 5 times the armor to prevent 100 damage. You need 10 times the armor to prevent half the damage. You need 20 times the armor to prevent 2/3 of the damage. And you need, what's this one? 30 times the armor to mitigate 3/4, and to prevent 90%, you need 90 times the damage in armor. So in our example here, which was 20,000 physical damage incoming, right? We want to mitigate 90% of that. So we need what was it? Let me look again. We need 90 times that in armor. So you need 1.8 million armor to mitigate 90% of 20,000, right? That's not obtainable in this game at all. Even if you stacked all the armor on tree, if you had perfect armor gear, like triple T1 armor, flat, and armor hybrid stun recovery, it still wouldn't be enough to get you this number. That's literally impossible. And that would only mitigate 90% of it, so that would put you would take 1.8 minus 1.62. You would still take 180,000 damage with your 1.8 million armor. Like you can't. You cannot use this as a source of defense against large hits. It falls off drastically. The larger the hit is, the worse your armor becomes, because armor is just a flat reduction, and it can never prevent more damage than its value divided by 10. So if you have 100,000 armor, you can only mitigate 10,000 damage max. So that's after your evasion, after your dodge chance, whatever. If that hit still manages to get through those layers of defense, it then hits against your armor. If it's physical damage, elemental damage is not affected by your armor at all. So it then will chunk you based on how much armor you have. Oh, I forgot another binary form of mitigation. What I mean by binary, I guess I haven't explained that yet. Binary mitigation is a yes or no. So in the case of blocking, evading, dodging, it's either you take the damage or you don't. Blocking is the same system as dodge and spell dodge. It's capped at 75% unless you have a, what's it called? The Anvil, which gives you 3% max block chance. It's right here. This is the only way to get maximum block chance in the game. It pushes you up to 78 max block if you have it on and you're capped otherwise. But yeah, it prevents you from taking all damage and any status ailment effects. You can block reflect, and you can also dodge and reflected damage, but you don't get to proc on block effects. Okay, so this, I believe this has the same system of entropy as evasion, maybe not. No, maybe not. So maybe block chance doesn't have that. Either way, if you're capped at 78% block chance, unless you are god tier lucky and you never take that 22% chance to take the hit, if you don't block something, it gets through your first layers of defenses and then it hits you in the effective life. So this is where we go on to effective life, which is this one. We'll start with life because it's the most like commonly known form of life, because it's literally named after it. It's effective life, right? You have life on your character, and that is just your life. If it goes to 0, you die. That's bad. So what's the issue with life right now in the current meta? Unless you invest incredibly heavily into your life pool on tree, like if you look at this character, I have life nodes, 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 and life nodes, life nodes, life nodes, life nodes. Like probably about, I don't know, 2/3 of my tree is life nodes, which means I don't get to invest as much into other things such as defenses, as stats, as damage, as for the counter example, as a CI build could get. A lot of CI builds are just taking like these nodes and these nodes, and that's literally all the ES they need on their tree. Everything else is just damage and survivability, which is an issue. So this game is meant to be a problem. Like, as a player, the problem that is presented to us is how to kill things without being killed ourselves. And when it comes to all these forms of mitigation, they're all like just a way to reduce the damage that you actually take to your effective life pool, and that means that like your goal at endgame is to just increase your effective life pool by as high as you can using other things. There's other things included like resistances. We talked about 75% cap. If this were, for example, a elemental damage hit, if you have capped resistances, which you have to play at merciless level difficulty or higher, like comfortably, just because of that 75% elemental resist, this is already reduced to 5k. Nothing else. You don't have to have any armor. You're already at 5k elemental damage taken. That's why, like, it's just, I don't know, it's weird to me how easy it is to get elemental resistance versus getting physical damage mitigation, because this does not, like, if you converted this to Ellie, just your normal average character with 75% all res would take 5k from that, versus if it was still pure physical damage, most characters would just immediately die to that damage, and there's nothing they can do about it. So I guess we should talk about percent physical mitigation, because that's the same thing as resistance is, elemental resistance, but they're not grouped in the same category for some reason. Like, in my opinion, the armor rating should be armor rating, and the physical damage reduction should be a percent-based physical damage reduction, which should be 0 for this character. I have no percent mitigation on because I haven't used any abilities yet, or stacked any forms of percent mitigation, which we're about to talk about. So percent mitigation just reduces the damage by percent total, up to 90% cap. So, in this example, if I were to manage to get 90% armor, or physical mitigation, sorry, actual physical mitigation, that would reduce the 20k down to 2k. It would remove 18,000 damage, put us down to 2,000 damage taken. Remember the armor example, to reduce that same amount of damage, we needed, what, 2 million armor or something like that? Which is impossible to get. I think it was 1.82, whatever. It was a ridiculous amount of armor. But if you just go for percent mitigation, it does the same effect on larger hits and smaller hits, and it doesn't fall off against the larger hits like the flat armor does. So if we look at this, there are a couple sources of percent mitigation. Number ones, or these are all just like fairly common ones. Endurance charges, which are just 4% phys mitigation each. Summon Chaos Golem is, I believe, 3 to 4%. 3 to 4% physical mitigation. At higher levels, it's 4%, so that's another endurance charge. Solo Steel is a really shit note on the tree that nobody gets ever. It's right here. 4% additional physical damage reduction, which again is the exact same thing as 1 endurance charge. But it costs you 4 points, or 3 points instead of 2. It's kind of bad. And then we have other types of things, like the Necromancer Ascendancy gets 1% phys per zombie. Ascending is 4% for itself and its minions. Guardian gets 1% phys reduction for each aura they cast. I don't know, there's a couple other like options, but not many. And then this doesn't actually say Taste of Hate. Taste of Hate must be the exception here. We have a couple of items that will convert physical damage into elemental damage, so that you can then convert the phys damage into your 75% resistance items, which would be things like Lightning Coil. This converts 30% of physical damage taken into lightning damage, so for this example, we had 20k physical damage, so we take 0.3 of that for the 30%. So we take 6,000 of it as lightning damage, right? Which then checks against our elemental resistance, which should be capped to 75. So then we could multiply this by 0.75, and it would take away 4,500 of that damage, so then you would take only 1,500 physical, or lightning damage, I'm sorry. So that would reduce the overall hit from 20k down to 14k, and then add on 1,500 lightning damage on top of that, so it would reduce it to 15.5k, oops, out of 20k. So that would give you 22.5% physical mitigation, or I guess just damage mitigation in this case, because you're still taking some lightning damage. So that means that Lightning Coil is the equivalent of, say, 22 divided by 4 is like, what, 5.5 endurance charges in phys mitigation? That's one of the reasons why this item was so popular back in the day, because physical damage was incredibly dangerous, and we didn't have all the additional sources of physical mitigation that we do now. So this was like best in slot forever until they changed the meta a little bit and started increasing the damage too high for the effective life pool, which was like, what, 6k-ish to be able to handle that thing, those hits. And at that point, people started transferring their effective life into energy shield, just because you can achieve such higher numbers. Like here, let me show you an example. Such higher levels of numbers with minimal investment, or if you want to invest heavily. This is a Righteous Fire Chieftain character. I am extremely heavily invested into life on this character, like all of the life nodes I can possibly get on the tree comfortably. And I still only managed to hit 10k life. That's including my 989 strength, which is another 450 flat life. And then I have life strength on all of my gear just to try to hit 10k life, right? That sounds amazing. I hit 10k life. Okay, cool. But if I were to go on an ES-based character and just like turn on discipline. Okay, not even. I'm not going to turn on discipline. That's another discussion entirely. Like, if you look at my skill tree, I have all the ES nodes that I could possibly get that are comfortable for me to grab. And I have 17.8k ES without discipline on. Now, discipline is literally just, like, imagine if this were on a life-based character, you could reserve your mana for 315 flat life. That would be amazing, right? Everybody would use it. But that word doesn't exist for life-based builds. It only exists for energy shield-based builds. So if I turn on discipline, it gives me an additional 2.2k energy shield. And another comparison between strength and life, or sorry, strength and intelligence. Intelligence, every 5 int gives you 1% increased energy shield. Every 5 strength, or sorry, every 2 strength, so say 5 strength would give you 2.5 flat life. 2.5 flat life versus 1% max. That's not even comparable at all. Intelligence is just blatantly better. And then the amount of life that you can get on most pieces of gear is around 70 to 100-ish. If you include strength, it goes up to like 100 to 120. Or 130 or so, because every 2 strength is 1 life. But if you looked at ES-based gear, the highest ES you can get on a chest piece is like 989 to 1,000 or something like that. 973. That's not including the intelligence on this item. So that's like equipping a Legacy Counsart 1,000 life chest piece with no resistances, no other stats, no links. Legacy Counts. That's one of the reasons why Energy Shield is so like easy to get these sort of numbers, because the amount of life you can get, or effective life you can get on each piece of gear, is ridiculously high compared to the life that you can get on a life-based thing. Okay, let's go back on this guy. So, we still haven't really talked about other sources of percent mitigation. So we have Lightning Coil, right? That's good, but it's not like... It locks you into using life-based gear, so it takes your chest slot, and it doesn't give you that much effective life. But there's other options for Fizz mitigation, such as Taste of Hate. It's the same sort of thing as the Lightning Coil. It converts some of the physical damage taken into cold damage taken. So in this case, it's 20% instead of 30%. So we do our 20,000 damage incoming physical hit times 0.2 to get the 20%. So that's taken as cold damage, which then checks against our 75% cold res. So we take 3,000 away from it entirely. We now take 16,000 physical damage plus the 1,000 cold damage. So we take 17,000 total damage out of the 20k. So we take 85%. So this translates into 15% Fizz mitigation, or damage mitigation against physical, which is pretty strong. That's 3 endurance charges at 4% each, plus almost another full endurance charge. And this is on a flask, by the way. Anybody can use this, which is why a lot of energy shield builds will use it, because they don't want to stack endurance charges. They just want this. This is like 20% mitigation. That's pretty good. 25%, or sorry, 15% mitigation, whatever. And it actually scales with flask effect. So if I had Pathfinder on this, which is 25% flask effectiveness, combined with the Alchemist nodes up at the top of the tree, right? These 3 nodes, you get 8%, 8%, that's 16, plus 14. That's 30% increased effective flask. Sorry, so Pathfinder is 20%. So you get 30% from this and 20% from Pathfinder, which translates into 50% total flask effect power. So this is multiplied by 1.5. This becomes 30% mitigation. So then our 15% actual mitigation would be multiplied by 1.5 as well, becoming 22.5% Fizz mitigation on a flask that you can press twice, and it recharges whenever you kill things. You don't have to maintain the endurance charges, etc., anything like that. So that's one of the reasons why you see this flask so often. It also gives you extra damage and extra cold res. Oh, I didn't mention this. The flask itself gives you max cold res. So instead of checking against that 75% res that we talked about, it would actually check against your 75 plus 6% res, which would be 81% res. So our 20,000 hit times 0.2, actually times 0.2 times 1.5, because of the flask effect, we mitigate 6,000 physical damage into cold, which is then checked against our 81% cold res, which means we only take 1,140 damage now instead of the 1,500 I think it was before, something like that. And then we multiply this, alright, 1141 divided by the 20,000. What am I doing wrong here? I'm doing something wrong math-wise, I'm sorry. But it just makes it a lot stronger. it gives you a huge chunk of max res in addition to like the mitigation. So that's another source of percent physical mitigation that you don't need to be a life-based build to wear, such as Lightning Coil. The other source of phys mitigation and elemental mitigation that a lot of people use but don't really know why they use it, they just follow the guides, is Fortify. Fortify is a buff that grants the player 20% reduced damage taken from hits for 4 seconds. This does not apply to damage over time because it does not hit. I feel like that's not needed to be stated, but apparently it has to be. So, this reduced damage taken when hit is calculated after armor, after resistance, and after your endurance charges, etc. And so this is the equivalent of 5 endurance charges, specifically against phys mitigation. So everybody uses like shield charge, faster attacks, Fortify. This is why they use Fortify. It's a huge chunk of reduced damage taken from everything, not just phys. It also includes elemental damage, so that's massive. I forgot where I was going with this. So let's like throw a character together with barely any thought into it, right? So we have base 3 endurance charges, 3 endurances, which is 4% times 3. That's 12% phys mitigation. And then we have Fortify. And then we have another source we didn't really talk about. There's another flask that is not a unique flask and also very, very cheap. It's just a basalt flask. Oops. Which gives you 20% physical damage reduction. Again, this is scaled by flask effect, so if you're non-Pathfinder, 20%. If you have the Alchemist nodes up the top of the tree, it's 26%. If you have the Alchemist nodes plus Pathfinder nodes, it's 30% phys mitigation on 1 flask. So that would be, we'll just go without any of those effects, we'll just be 20%. Okay, so with those 3 things, which requires no investment at all other than 1 red link, 1 flask slot, which is not worth that much, and 3 endurances that you just need to generate, so I guess another gem link for Enduring Cry, that puts you at 52% phys mitigation, right? That means we have 52% total. Typos OP. So, against this 20,000 physical damage incoming hit, we would mitigate 52% of that, which means we would take 48% of it, to do a shortcut here. So this means we would take 9,600 damage as physical. That sounds like a lot, but again, remember we talked about the difference between effective life with life-based builds and energy shield builds? An energy shield build can relatively easily achieve above 10 KES, and use these 3 things with no issues. A life-based build that was using these 3 things, and maxed out its life on tree, would have 10,000 life as well, but that's like just Righteous Fire builds that do that. There are very few other builds that come anywhere close to that. Most life-based builds will cap at around 7k life. So in the case of all of those life-based builds, they're dead. In the case of all the basic low-end energy shield builds with 10k energy shield, they're fine. The min-max energy shield characters with 15 to 20k, yes, this is nothing. But to most life-based characters, you are dead. With the same level of investment. The issue that I have here is that to get a survivable hit from this amount of damage as a life-based build, you need to get more mitigation than this, so you'd have to stack, like, say 4 more endurances from the tree and your Merciless Bandit point. That would add 16% mitigation on top of that, and then if you really wanted to go hard, you could grab a Taste of Hate as well. To translate into 15% mitigation, so those are some pretty hefty investment. 3 endurances on tree plus a flask slot again would translate into 12 plus 20 plus 20 plus 16 plus 15, 83% phys mitigation. Again, this is percent, not worried about the flat armor reduction at all. So this would be 20,000 damage times times 0.71 because you take 17, sorry, because you take 17% of the total damage, you would only take 3,400 damage, and that you would survive that as a life-based character. But you have to heavily invest to get that same level of investment. Now the fun part here is this is all phys mitigation, so if we were to ignore all of this, to just delete that, and just convert this into elemental damage incoming, right? say it gets past our evasion and dodge, and our block chance, and our spell block, whatever. It gets past all of those things. Armor does nothing in this case, so that's gone. This is gone. Percent mitigation, those don't help against the... These three don't help against the actual elemental damage taken. Fortified does. And then you're left with your resistances. Wow, I can't spell. So, against elemental damage, if we have 20k elemental damage incoming, and we just have Fortify and our normally capped elemental resistance, which is 75, almost always, we just do this. It's 20k damage, or sorry, we add 75 plus 20%. We have 95% elemental mitigation. Seems fine, right? So you take 20,000 Ellie, and you multiply it by 0.05, because you take 5%. Bam, you take 1,000 damage. That's a lot easier to mitigate than physical damage, with literally no investment at all. If I were to throw, say it's a lightning damage hit, and I have a Vingtars active, so I have 81% resistance. Max resistance, sorry, and then I would have 20% on top of that. I would actually mitigate all of it, I think. I just wouldn't take damage, because I'd have 81 plus 20% less damage taken from hits. So I would take negative 1% damage. Which seems good, right? It's just incredibly easier to get elemental mitigation than it is to get physical mitigation in this game. But the easier way to solve both of those problems is to just push your effective life pool high enough that it doesn't actually matter what percent mitigation you have. Like, for example, that 20k yes character that I have, Annoying Waffles, if I just take the 20k physical damage, or elemental damage, let's change this to physical, specifically for this example. So if I just take that damage on Annoying Waffles, without any armor, any phys mitigation, any flash sub, just my life pool, effective life pool, I would survive with 64 ES left. And yeah, that's the issue. You don't have to have any mitigation if you have enough effective life. So like, you can totally forego all of the investment on your tree, on your gear, on your flasks, on your gem links, etc. to just get more effective life pool, and you would survive everything easier than if you just tried to invest into those things and struggle along as a life-based character in endgame content. But yeah, I hope that teaches you guys a lot. I don't really know if I explained that well, so if you have any more questions, leave them in the comments below. The wiki is always available if you want to research this sort of thing. I highly recommend you read into it. This is how you learn the mechanics of a game that is in depth as this, or you watch videos such as this. But yeah, if you have any ideas for the next Demi Splains video, go ahead and post them in the comments below. I have an ongoing list of like to-dos of what people need explained or want explained, and I will keep working on those as I can. So I hope this helped again, and that is Demi out.